From the plains to the rolling hills, Oklahoma is a state that resonates with stories of resilience, determination, and pride. Welcome to Inside the 1581, a podcast of the Oklahoma Hospital Association. Together, we'll dive deep into the heartbeat of the great state of Oklahoma as we journey through the rich history, diverse culture, and the ever-evolving landscape within the 1,581 miles of border in our nation's 20th largest state. Each episode of Inside the 1581 will feature conversations with the many voices which help shape our state's future and our shared vision of improving health and healthcare in Oklahoma.
Today in this edition of Inside the 1581, I am joined by one of my colleagues, Kelly Parker, who is the CFO at Share Medical Center in Alva, and we're here at the OHA's Leadership Forum, where we've been spending some time talking about how we can develop our skills to address conflict. And Kelly, thanks for being a part of our sit-down here, following up on our workshop that we just went through today.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
So you tell us a little bit about yourself. So you are the Chief Financial Officer at your hospital. And you also happen to be the mayor as well. So you're probably using several different leadership skills.
Yeah, it was interesting to see all of the leadership skills just kind of lined out there. I have seen myself using all of them at one time or another, because it really you deal with conflict about every time you turn around, and sometimes it's conflict that needs to be resolved, and sometimes it's conflict that'll resolve itself, and sometimes there needs to be a facilitator, and sometimes that's you.
Well, and we learned today, we used the TKI assessment, which allows us to identify different strategies for addressing conflict. And I know for myself, I thought they were pretty spot on. Were they pretty spot on for yourself, or was you
pretty
thought
close?
There was a little bit of variability? Yeah.
Pretty close. It was kind of eye-opening because I kind of picture myself more as a collaborator, and that ranked high in my TKI. Maybe a little bit surprised that the competition or the competing mode was the highest that I scored.
Well, for our listeners, if you've never participated in using some assessments, I mean, we hear oftentimes about the DISC or, Myers-Briggs, and the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument is a very effective tool that, as we learned today, is one in which it can evolve and change over time as we continue to hone our leadership skills, and we find that our ability to address conflict being shaped by our own experiences.
Absolutely. I think, having held the, various leadership positions, and then, the public office with the mayor position, you certainly use a different set of skills in that public office than you do as the supervisor / leader in a hospital.
And I think that's an important point, because we heard that mentioned by several of the participants, that how I present at work might be different from how I present at home. And I know as a father of five, I respond differently to the kids than I probably would responding to folks that I work with or I have responsibilities for leading in my own organization.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, having this kind of recognition that maybe hadn't been presented to me in this way before, you've got to develop that amongst your team. You talk about your family. You want your kids to grow up to be able to resolve conflicts and be productive in what they do. And so, in a roundabout way, I think, having this awareness it's going to help me go back and try to help those that whether it's somebody I'm supervising, or whether it's a member of my community, or whether it's a member of my family, to help put them into a position to where they start to see the ways that they can influence conflict and deal with conflict more appropriately, more effectively.
Well, and for our listeners, there are the ways in which you address conflict that is laid out, and which we learned about today, are competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, or accommodating. And I know for me, several of mine were really close to one another. So they may have been a couple points off from one another, but clearly number one for me in terms of a skill that I use in addressing conflict was accommodating, and one I rarely use, which was avoidance. And so for me, it was, how can I use that avoidance skill that is not part of my typical, arsenal that I use in addressing conflict? How did yours shake out?
Mine shook out similar. The avoidance actually was near the bottom. The accommodating was surprisingly, for me, it was surprising that was my lowest scored area. I really feel like I try to accommodate, and I guess it's situational. When we talk about our patients and our customers and the people that we're taking care of, I want to try to be, customers always right mentality, try to do what they need us to do, and if we have to work harder to have them have a good experience, then that's my expectation. So it's more accommodating for them, less accommodating for my staff at times if that's the case, but maybe not having really looked into it quite as thoroughly as we did this afternoon.
And so I would imagine for yourself, yes, you're a leader in your healthcare organization, but also, a leader in your community, that you probably do reach into these skill sets and use them very differently based on your role as the mayor versus your role as a leader in your family, and your role as the chief financial officer at your hospital. Yeah,
and I think one of the things that we talked about when we kind of broke up into small groups, a lot of times by virtue of the position you hold in leadership, and it, again, doesn't matter if it's supervisory or elected or family or whatever, but a lot of times by virtue of that position you hold, people come to you with their conflicts, seeking you to resolve them. And I think it's important to step back and really determine, is this your conflict to resolve? And maybe you can take an opportunity to not necessarily assert yourself into that situation and point them in a direction that allows them to resolve their own conflicts.
Right, and or finding a way to take that pass.
Yeah,
which is what I struggle with. I growing up, I didn't have the opportunity to avoid my older brothers. I had to deal with it. And I'm sure my younger brothers didn't have the opportunity to avoid me. We just learned to deal with it. And so for me, this was really eye-opening in terms of, a different set of skills that I can deploy outside of, what I'm traditionally used to doing, and bringing that into my leadership role as the CEO of the association. And so I found it to be very empowering to have this in front of me and then work through the scenarios we worked through.
Oh yeah, it was great. This is, I've been to a few of the OHA conferences and trainings, and probably this has been one of the more effective ones from my standpoint for being able to have some, reflection more into how I lead, as opposed to maybe the nuts and bolts of what we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and hopefully folks had the opportunity to take something home that they can use and deploy, when they get back into their organizations and back into their groove again.
I would imagine they did. Sounded like everybody had something that they gained out of it.
Well, I appreciate it. Kelly, thanks for joining us. We were just doing a quick sit down after a good 3-hour plus session of leadership development here at the OHA Leadership Forum. And I've been talking to Kelly Parker, who's the Chief Financial Officer for Share Medical Center, and also the Honorable Mayor of Alva. And so, Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rich.
All right. Thank you. When we come back, we're going to be talking to one of the consultants that we work with at SoundMind Leadership, who helped bring this program together. And we'll talk a little bit more about the TKI, about strategies that we can use to further develop our leadership skills. But we'll do that when we come back from this message from the folks at PYA.
In today's healthcare environment, one size does not fit all. Resources are limited, but demands are not. PYA's Overwatch lets you choose the exact level of compliance support you need without paying for the services you don't. Your Overwatch is built for you. Learn more at pyapc.com.
Welcome back to this edition of Inside the 1581. I'm Rich Rasmussen, your host, and we were just talking just a moment ago with Kelly Parker, who's the Chief Financial Officer from Share Medical, and Kelly also having served, or currently is serving as the mayor of Alva, and we were delighted to be able to have him share with us his thoughts about how our event today at the OHA's Leadership Forum and in focusing in on how we most appropriately address conflict. And so I'm joined here today with one of our facilitators that helped us with our workshop today and helped us to best understand the use of the TKI, and that's Steve Loveless, who is the founder of SoundMind Leadership. So Steve, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Rich. Good to be here.
Well, before we get into this, Steve, talking a little bit more about leadership development, certainly conflict skills, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and SoundMind Leadership? I know you have a couple of your colleagues here and really worked with, more than 70, 80 executives here that were focused on how they can best, leadership up their skills, I guess it might be the way we would call it. How about that?
A great way to frame it. So I spent 25 years in senior executive roles in the healthcare industry, really coming up through operations, and then sat in the chair as the CEO and spent the last part of my career as the regional president for SCL Health, and really loved that work, felt called to it, and made a career shift or transition into this space of development, which my undergrad is in psychology, had a knack for and a super strong interest in human development, human performance. And it's interesting that my career has brought me now to this place where that's our focus 100% of the time. So SoundMind Leadership is a firm that is focused on human potential, human performance. It's executive coaching and leadership development. All of our coaches have certifications with the ICF, and all of them have extensive experience in the healthcare space.
And so tell us about your logo. I know there's a story behind it.
Yeah, we really needed something that, through just the visual, would draw attention to that co-creation, the coming alongside, the being a part of supporting you in your development. And we felt that the Karin really drew that out, and spent a lot of time on trails, spent a lot of time in the mountains. And always when you see that Karin, you know that you're at least directionally on the right path.
Right. And somebody has been on that path before too.
And have been on that path
Yeah.
many times, and have learned a lot through the process of failing.
Yeah. Well, and we all have. I mean, and you don't learn unless you've benefited or been blessed with having failed at some level.
And that's how we learn, and we need to allow others that opportunity and learn from those failures, which we do.
Yeah. And so here we've spent some time with peers here across the state in Oklahoma. We've spent some time working through their TKI. So why don't you just kind of share us a little bit about the TKI, how it is an effective assessment tool, and what we can learn from that. And certainly for our listeners who've not invested in a survey tool like this, what they can expect to gain from having used this in their organizations.
You bet. So the TKI is the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Assessment. It really helps you understand, what are my natural tendencies in conflict? Where do I go? And where are those opportunities? The objective is, how do we help you get facile with all 5 modes so that you can choose the right mode at the right time for the right circumstance? And so today, everybody had an opportunity to complete the TKI. They had their results. One of our objectives was self-awareness. That's how you become more effective as a leader, is you understand, who am I? What are my natural tendencies? One of the things we talked about today is creating space between the stimulus and the response. So our reflex or reactive tendency, where we would naturally go without that space, is what they came to understand through the TKI assessment. What they also got an opportunity to experience is, what would it look like? What would it feel like to use one of those modes that is not my natural tendency? and to create exposure, opportunity to understand where might I invoke these other conflict modes that would help me become even more effective in my current role.
You know what I would always say to my kids, don't react, respond. Just take that moment, step back and make a determination of what is the most appropriate way to respond to that stimulus or that event that took place. And I think we talked a lot about that here.
Yeah, we did. And a lot of discussion about when we're in conflict, what happens to us physically, where we go physically, and what's going on the inside. One of the premises we work from is the inner game, the things that I'm thinking, the things that I'm feeling, the stories I'm reinforcing. That inner game always drives the outer game. And that's how others then begin to experience you and experience you over time. So when you think about conflict, we're in a circumstance, oftentimes we're thrown because now there's tension in the room. And if we can create space between that stimulus, the conflict, and your response, your natural MO as to where you would go, so that you can move from that amygdala hijack, just the fight, flight, or freeze mode, and make a conscious choice as to where you want to go to serve the circumstances that you're in, you're going to be much more effective as a leader. And that comes from creating self-awareness and intentionality.
And no leader can avoid conflict. I mean, we learned about avoidance, but I mean, it is inevitable that particularly if you are playing in a game, like we talk about this, right? If you're playing to win, you're going to inherently have some conflict. You just have to figure out the best way to work through that conflict to still arrive at the same outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
And that's really where we started today. That term conflict has such a negative.
It does have a negative, and it's really not. It's addressing the issue at hand.
That's exactly right. And it can serve us well if we can change our mindset about conflict. It becomes an opportunity.
Now, outside of what we talked about here today, certainly just the work that we have to do to develop and to foster leadership. In your experience, certainly, as a leader of a large health system, and then the work you're doing today, where do you see the biggest challenges, and then where are those opportunities that perhaps organizations aren't reaching out to be able to develop the leadership that the in-house talent that they already have?
Yeah, we keep thinking that when all this stuff goes away, when Medicaid is settled, then we can just get back to where we were.
Before COVID. Remember you say, before COVID.
And the reality is we're not going back.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be thinking forward. And in fact, if we don't continue to develop, we're going to be left behind. We need to be investing in our personal development and in the development of our teams, because the issues, the challenges that we're confronted with today are more complex than the issues and challenges we were confronted with yesterday. And we have to upscale our leadership effectiveness, our leadership abilities, if we're going to be effective in managing through the issues of tomorrow, which comes back to the development of oneself and the development of one's team. And that's the opportunity in executive coaching and leadership development.
Do you see that many organizations really miss that? I mean, they're not nailing it because you have someone who shows great acumen, the great potential, and you put them into a leadership role, and they're unsupported, and they have a high failure rate, or you don't get the outcomes that you had expected because you just simply aren't supporting them.
And the reality is that skills that helped you get into the role you're in today may not be the skills you need to thrive in that role.
Sure.
And we find that an awful lot, that we have these self-protective strategies, these natural reactions to the circumstances that we're faced with that build resilience, and we find success. And then we find ourselves in a role where that self-protective strategy all of a sudden gets in the way of effectiveness. It's helped me to thrive or survive, but it's limiting my effectiveness now in the role that I'm in. And to uncover those, to discover those, and to have a strategy to get out of it, it requires some real intentionality.
Well, what would you say? I mean, if you have the opportunity to sit in front of, it doesn't have to be healthcare leaders. It certainly made, large organizations or in front of their leadership teams, I mean, what would you tell them in terms of the importance of investing in leadership development? In other words, we think of, well, gosh, we have an HR department, or we have internal education department, but are they really delivering in the type of professional development that is necessary to really grow and foster true exceptional leadership at a time when we really need it?
Yeah, we need it now more than ever. And if you're doing that, kudos to you. We would compliment you and encourage you in your efforts, and then look at how we could bolster or help you to become even more effective in it. If you're not investing, this world is going to leave you behind. The challenges, the issues, the circumstances we're facing are becoming increasingly more complex. We need to be upscaling our effectiveness as leaders. I don't think that there is an investment that can be made that would be more impactful or important given where we're at in our evolution of healthcare today. I think this is one of those best places that you can invest moving forward.
And you work with a number of different industries. I know you do some stuff with higher ed as well, private corporations, financial institutions. Who do you think is doing this best? Is there anybody doing it well, or do we all really suffer from a leadership void that we really need to fill?
It's less about industry and more about organizations.
Okay.
Even when we're looking at partners, individuals, or organizations that we want to be working with, it really comes down to mindset. There isn't one industry that is doing it exceptionally well, some better than others, but it really is about the mindset of the leader. If the leader sees the spend on development as an investment in their future, we know that that's a winner. When they see it as an expense, we know that that's going to be problematic. And so it's really about that mindset of the executive and the executive team on the development of leaders. And again, we want to be working with organizations that see that as an investment in their future. There is a dividend. The dividend is always paid as if you're doing it and doing it effectively.
I have seen, and we have tried to deliver on some of those leadership development opportunities for our team members, and certainly in hiring. One of the first things we do at your council was to initiate a Hogan assessment on all of our new hires that allows us to be able to quickly collapse where our gaps are. Gaps in terms of how I might address issues versus a new hire, so that we can focus in on those things where there might be the natural tendencies of conflict. So if from your role, if you were counseling an executive on how best to up their leadership game in their organization in terms of supporting their team members, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that they should have on their list that should be part of their leadership development track for their employees?
Yeah, first of all, Rich, kudos to you, because that Hogan on the front end and then the debrief with the individual, allowing them to see, hey, here's what the assessment would tell us about your natural tendencies. What does that look like for you? How does that play out? And then your vulnerability to say, let me talk to you about some of my tendencies.
It works
as
when
it
you
relates
do
to
that.
this issue. I believe it shortens that get to know you space down to what would normally be 9 months to a year, down to a few months. I mean, we just take months off of that timeline with a simple assessment and a debrief that just creates vulnerability between the two individuals. A candid conversation about, this is where I excel, this is where I have gifts, and here are some limitations and opportunities that I need to be aware of and that will be helpful that we're aware of together. So when I think about organizations and where to make the investment, and when we come into an organization, it typically comes one of 2 ways. We're either working with the team and team effectiveness, or we're coming in working with individuals in executive coaching space, and then oftentimes that evolves into work with teams. Where it's most effective, and often the end result as we get there, is you're doing a bit of both, where the individual has an opportunity for self-awareness, self-learning, the creation of a plan where they can be very intentional about the opportunities that exist for them personally, coupled with the opportunities that the organization needs them to be focused on. So where we can do that with the individual, and then as we bring teams together and they're doing that individual work and then the collective work as a team, that's where things really take off.
Have you, in your work, have you kind of hit that little giddy button? I mean, when you're doing this work, you're saying, God, I really see it working. I see organizations being transformed. I see individuals who are living to their highest potential. How does that make you feel? And do you have a success story?
Oh, Rich. So
I think of impact as one. You can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and let me start by just an example. We're working with a large critical access hospital right now. It started with some work with the CEO. He was in a group of others. I'll reference that in a minute. But he brought this then into his organization, his executive team, and then started to work it down to his leadership team. They have gone from the past 2 years from about a 2.5% operating margin to now close to 9% operating margin. Mind you, our focus largely is not on the financial performance. We know that that's the outcome.
But that's the fruits that can come from it.
That is the fruit of the focus. He now has a team that is very aligned. They've been very intentional on their goals. The individuals on that team are very self-aware and being very intentional on their individual areas of focus as they're mindful of the teamwork and how it's coming together as a team. A lot of examples on individuals and the ahas that they have. And some of those come very, very early in the process, but they continue to happen over the course of time. We did have an example of a ton of fun for me personally. We brought together a group of CEOs. You could do this with CEOs, CMOs, CNOs, or leadership, individuals from the executive teams. In this case, it was 9 critical access hospital, or 8 CEOs, 1 CFO in the cohort. The objective was, how do we improve the retention of the group and improve the speed to effectiveness? And those were the 2 goals that we had. Here we are 3 years later, and all of those individuals are still within the state. One of them was promoted.
Which is amazing because their turnover rate is more than, 35%?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so here we are 3 years later. They went through the implementation year, now plus 2 years, all still within the state. One of them was hired by one of the others. One was promoted. All the others are in their roles. So when we look back at the outcomes and the objectives, hit it, nailed it. And in fact, they are such a support for one another. One of the natural outcomes of that experience together is the camaraderie that they feel one for another, which comes back to retention. Once you feel that, and you've got a tribe, and you've got people that you know care about you individually, there's a sense of place there, and they feel that and have that. The experience was bringing them together quarterly. So there's group learning that occurred within it. And then individually, each one of them had an executive coach that was working with them, where they had that individual self-awareness, the support, a development plan, and it was a raging success from every measure.
Well, when you think about it, it is, again, the investment certainly does pay off. And if any organization has used or is planning to use an executive search firm, you know what the fees are when you bring in an executive search firm. If you just invested in the talent you already had in place, the likelihood of them leaving when they feel supported is going to be much lower because they feel supported.
Yeah.
And there's a savings there.
And in the executive coaching, the whole premise, I mean, if you're in a one-on-one relationship with an individual, from a coaching standpoint, we come at that relationship with unconditional positive regard for the individual. It's really taking them where they are. We strip down all of the barriers between us. It's about creating the trust so that they can be transparent with their thinking and their feelings, and that's where the magic really begins to occur. And so they feel safe in that relationship. There's an openness. There's a transparency on their natural tendencies, where they are today, coupling both identity, how they see themselves, with reputation, how others are experiencing them, and we start to bring those two things together with an understanding of where it is they want to go.
And obviously, you're using a tool to help you with that assessment. So what is the tool that you're using, and how have you found that to be really complementary of the individual one-on-one coaching?
Yep, we've got a number of tools. This tool that we're referencing right now is called the Leadership Circle Profile, and I found that to be one of the most effective tools to create an understanding of how I'm being experienced by those around me. So it's a 360 assessment. But there are many other tools that will invoke or include, like a TKI, at times a Hogan, if somebody is new to the organization, doesn't have the experience for a 360 assessment, and many others. The key is the self-awareness. The key is intentionality. Do I have a plan given where the organization needs me to go and given where I am today as to the things that I'm going to do to change, to grow, to evolve, to be more effective?
Well, I do appreciate you guys coming out and supporting us here. I think, the feedback that I've received just from walking across the room and from having Kelly sit here, they found it to be incredibly supportive to the work that they're trying to do. And I think Kelly's quote was, I'm looking at Alex here, I think Kelly said something like, this is one of the best, events that I've been to in terms of professional development, actually, giving me something that I can take home with me.
Well, thanks. A ton of fun to be with this group. Very engaged. Love the work that's happening within Oklahoma.
And so we've been talking to Steve Loveless, who is the founder of SoundMind Leadership, here as we close out our first half of our day at the Leadership Forum of the Oklahoma Hospital Association. And part of what we do at the Leadership Forum is to bring, seasoned leaders and emerging leaders together to learn from one another, to build some of that muscle memory in terms of what they can do to leverage in leading their organizations. And so that's what we've been doing today. And excuse me. And so if anybody is interested in learning more about SoundMind Leadership, feel free to click us. I think Alex will probably have something on the video version of this, and we'll probably put something on the audio version as well. Steve, your URL is?
SoundMindLeadership.com.
SoundMindLeadership.com. So I encourage you, and particularly if you're a hospital leader and you're trying to figure out the best way to support your executive team members, and I know from my experience of using SoundMind Leadership at the OHA, it has been a real game changer for us. And I would encourage you to, if it's not SoundMind Leadership, look for an executive coach and a team that can help you change your game. And that's going to be so important as the work we do becomes more and more difficult going forward. And again, Steve, thanks for joining us. And you've been listening in on a special edition of Inside the 1581, where we have been talking to some folks here at our Leadership Forum of the Oklahoma Hospital Association. And again, I just want to thank Alex Taylor, who brought up all the gear here to do our recording here at the Shangri-La Resort. Thank you, Alex, who produces our podcast, and Susie Wallace, who is our Vice President of Strategic Communications that oversees all that we do at OHA. And again, we just want to thank those of you who are listening in. And again, if you have any questions or suggestions or a story you would like for us to share with your peers and others, that's what we're here to do, to tell these stories within the 1,581 miles of the great state of Oklahoma. Thank you all for listening.